Good day and welcome. You may recognize our guest from one of his many film and television appearances in his roles of It's a Boy Girl Thing, Aaron Stone, Cell 213, Patchtown, Satisfaction, Darknet, The Thunderman's First Round, What We Do in the Shadows, It Chapter 2, Take Note, Hudson and Rex, Pretty Hard Cases, The Listener, and of course, for his performance as Donnie in the hit TV show Blue Mountain State, with his newest project, doused with history, Pub Crawl. These are just a few of his many titles and a growing resume. Please welcome, pardon me, please welcome Rob Ramsay. Rob, thank you so much for your time and joining me today.
It is a pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Rob, I want to dive into it with you. You have this new project, Pub Crawl. Walk us through Pub Crawl. What can people expect to see from this? What was the drive behind creating it? Just tell us everything.
Yeah, it's kind of a dream job. So Pub Crawl is a show that can be found on Bell 5. And it is a show that, an unscripted show that I am proud to host and produce. It all sort of started, I'm from the Maritimes, and the man behind it, John, my producing partner and the creator, he and I were at a bar one day and we were looking up at these old rafters and we were like, man, this place looks really old. And we did a quick Google search and we realized this bar we were sitting in was like 230, 250 years old. And that took us by surprise. And the more we looked into it, we realized that so many of these bars and restaurants in the Maritimes, Halifax especially, have this crazy history that I think so many of us take for granted and don't appreciate it. And it's not just Halifax and the Maritimes, it's across the country and of course around the world. People have been drinking in bars for longer than Canada's been around. But that sort of inspired the show. We thought let's celebrate the history of these bars and restaurants in Halifax specifically, in a very unpretentious, untraditional, pompous way. So the gig is really, I go into these bars and restaurants and knock back a beer or 10 and chat with an owner or a manager, or, in some cases a bartender who's been there for 30 years, as well as some locals, some historians, some politicians. We have a great chat with the mayor of Halifax, and learn about the history of these places. So we have 2 seasons, 12 plus bars, and we hear some amazing stories. Like there was a bar fight outside of a place called the Split Crow, that inspired the first murder trial in Canada. We learn about the history of rum running and the rum trade from the Caribbean to Halifax to Europe, and why alcohol holds such a prominent position in the Maritimes. And there's all these stories of tunnels that run underneath the city and that date back to the rum running. And we find some of them and we get to explore some of them, and all of these really cool stories. And like I said, have a few beers along the way. So yeah, 2 seasons on Bell 5, and I hope everyone enjoys.
That's you're absolutely right. It is the dream job to hang out with your friends at a bar, knock back, and I love what you said, 1 to 10 pints, maybe more.
Sure.
and learn about the place. And so when we look at you had mentioned that it was unscripted, so it's kind of this improvised, kind of see what happens during your time there.
Yeah. I mean, we work very closely with some researchers and the local archives, and we sort of know the interesting stories, but we want to hear it from these people. So it's a lot of we want to hear firsthand accounts of it, or how the story has evolved over the years. So there's an art to sort of leading a conversation and trying to get it to a place you want, but also being really authentic and wanting to hear it from these people's mouths and their take on the story, or interpretation of the story. So I certainly go into these conversations knowing the 500-foot level of what might have happened, but I want these people to take me sort of to ground zero.
And how do you qualify which pub or location you're going to? Does it have to be a certain amount of years old? Do they have to have a certain thing on tap for you? How do you know which one to go to?
I mean, they kind of speak to us. In Halifax, especially, there's with our first season, we really approached it with like, if someone is a Haligonian from Halifax and we didn't go to these places, they'd be pissed at us. So those bars and restaurants sort of came. Those were obvious. In second season, we thought, well, what are some more local spots that that maybe not everyone goes? When like the cruise ship pulls up, they're not going to these spots, but if you live there, these little holes in the wall. And yeah, some of them are hundreds of years old. Some of them just have these really incredible stories, a rich history. Some of them have a dark history. We explored one private club that was one of the last places in Atlantic, Canada, to allow people of color and Jewish people in. And so we have a great chat with a buddy of mine who is a person of color, and we get his take on it and his story on it. So yeah, there is no sort of like criteria that it has to fill, but it just through conversations and research of our own, they sort of bubble to the top.
That's awesome. Listen, I think it's a dream job. You're absolutely right. And if you need anybody else to go drinking with and tell stories, you know where I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, we did 2 seasons. They were both in Halifax because I'm from the Maritimes, and so is John, the creator. But we're hoping to take the show on the road. So stay tuned for that. We'd love to go across Canada. There's lots of amazing places, like, a place we haven't been to, but it has stories of its own, like the Gander Airport in Newfoundland. I think a lot of us know it from the musical Come From Away, from its significant role in 9/11. But before then, and before transatlantic flight, almost every airplane going to Europe had to stop at this airport. And it was one of the few places where locals could go to the bar as well. You didn't have to be getting on a flight to go there. So there's all these incredible stories of like Marilyn Monroe, Nelson Mandela, the Queen, Frank Sinatra, any celebrity you can think of is like bumping elbows with the locals there. So there's stories like that, all the way to the other side of the country where I'm going to mess up the name now, but there was this iconic bar in BC that was built at the beginning of the gold rush. And as all the gold would be found in one town, they put the bar on logs and float it down the river to the next town where everyone set up shop. And it ended up traveling like 250 kilometers. And so there's lots of places like that. And of course, places that shaped, our political history and our legislative history and cultural history. And so, yeah, we're looking to take the show on the road soon. So stay tuned.
I love how passionate you are about that dream job, by the way. It really makes me jealous. But I can just see it as you're describing it and as you're talking about it, that you're just so passionate about it. And it's really nice to see.
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to create a show. We wanted to create a show for people like us who aren't history aficionados, but just enjoy a beer and a good story. We're history fans, not buffs. So that was sort of the genesis behind the show, and it gets me fired up, gets me excited. Hopefully others too.
Having a pint and a good story, I think everyone can relate to.
Yeah, exactly. It's universal.
Now, I want to ask you something. You were actually casted from the football field in a project for It's a Boy Girl thing. Now, when you were in school, were your eyes set on becoming an actor? Was it more the gridiron, like from the football field to the stage to behind the camera, in front of the camera? How did that happen?
A great question. When I was younger, I was in a youth choir, and the choir instructor also did some local theater, and she got me involved in a production, Anne of Green Gables, which is funny because I ended up being in Anne, the TV show. And so that was sort of the thin edge of the wedge, I guess you could say. It all sort of started from there. I did more theater. and that yeah, then I sort of caught the bug and started doing more. And then when it came time to go to university, I wanted a place where I could pursue and hone acting, but I also had been playing football for 5-10 years. I mean, I'm a big dude, 6'4". We won't get into the details, but I'm a big dude. And yeah, so I wanted a place that had a football program and an acting program. I ended up going out east. Football didn't work out. I think I got away with my size and not as much skill in the past. So yeah, so I started pursuing acting, and yeah, I was playing on a football team in high school, and a casting director, I think, came to the field one day, and they were doing this movie, It's a Boy Girl thing, and they needed some background actors, and I was selected to be one. And then I guess I've always sort of been a loud, boisterous guy, so at the last second they needed someone to fill an actual acting role, and so they asked me to do that. And that got me an agent, and got me a few other roles, and the rest is history.
Now, you actually mentioned about some times on stage. Do you prefer stage work or being in front of the camera for film and television?
I haven't done theater in a long time, like not since university. I would love to again. I don't know. I don't have a preference one way or another. They're both so different. It's very different kind of acting. Um, I think I'm really liking film and television. It's just like everything's just a little bit smaller and tighter. Um, raising an eyebrow can be a monologue. So I think that's sort of where my preference lays. But man, I'd love to do some theater again.
Out of anybody who can raise an eyebrow and make it a monologue, it's definitely going to be you. I think that's something you have to write for sure.
Well, thank you.
So when we talk about acting and being in front of the camera and going through this audition process, what do you believe is the most challenging part of being an actor?
The instability, the insecurity. I mean, hey, I've been at a point where I was a full-time actor that was paying the bills, and then comes and goes, man. It's all in waves. Sometimes that'll dry. Sometimes you'll have a good year, and then sometimes you won't work for a year. And that can be really frustrating, especially for someone like myself, who's kind of I love organization. I'm a bit of a neat freak. And so not knowing when your next paycheck is coming is really taxing. So that was the hardest part for me.
Now, you had mentioned insecurity. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all, being creative is being vulnerable and opening yourself up. And that, of course, allows some intrusive thoughts to sort of come in. And I think anytime you sort of open yourself up and put yourself out there, you have insecurities and you're not sure you're good enough. You're not sure you nailed that, not sure. Anytime you send an audition off to the powers that be, I think you're always thinking, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's what they're looking for. I'm not sure. Am I good enough? I don't know. And I think that certainly gets easier the longer you do it, and the more auditions you do. It becomes easier to just sort of like press send and forget about it. But I think there's always that little voice in the back of your head.
Now, you had actually mentioned some downtime. Sometimes you're really busy, and other times you won't work for a year or a couple months. So it kind of brings me to a question. Do you believe that when we look at honing in our skills and our craft and our talent, when we have these down periods, should we be taking acting classes or acting workshops? Should we be doing weekly monologues just for ourselves to stay on kind of that cusp of sharpening our skill set? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say yes, to a degree. Do as much as makes you happy and confident. And I only say that because I, like many people, I think during the pandemic, felt a sense of like, all right, I really got to capitalize on this time. Like I should be writing a screenplay. I should be working on something. I should be doing X. I should be doing X. And that pressure I put on myself was exhausting. And it wasn't until I had a friend of mine be like, man, go easy on yourself. Like, this is, you don't, the pressure you're putting on yourself is going to hurt your skill and your capability. So do as much as makes you comfortable, and as much as makes you feel confident.
That's fair. I really like that you said that. A lot of people will run out and get the next workshop or the next weekend warrior course in hopes that it helps. But
Totally.
like,
But even now, like if you're working a job, sometimes a couple of jobs, and then add on to that, like, oh, I have this idea for a script. I want to noodle on that. And I also want to take this acting class, and I want to network. I want to be doing all this. Like that's like 4 jobs. And that doesn't help anyone. Cause part of being creative is being present. And it's hard to do that if your mind is in 15 different places.
that's really insightful. You actually have mentioned script writing a few times now. Do you believe that screenwriting or writing helps you become a better actor or a better performer, or is it just kind of a creative outlet while we're waiting?
100%. I would encourage any actor to write as well. For a few reasons. I listen, it's an unorthodox, I got that advice in an unorthodox place. I was at I think like 20 years ago, I went to the Trailer Park Boys were doing like an appearance at a bar, and they did a Q&A. And one of them was saying how in Canada, especially, you have to create your own opportunity. So that sort of inspired me to really start writing. And then once I did it, I was like, I didn't know how I ever auditioned for anything without writing before, because it just opens your eyes to the writer's intentions and motivations, and allows you to get a better grasp of a character and what's how to shape them. And like the impact of a comma and how that can totally define a character, of like, okay, well, if that comma means they're really thinking about this word, which means they're someone who really thinks about things, or puts time and thought into something. So like something as minimal as that can have such an impact on a character. And I didn't realize that until I started writing.
Now, when we talk about these impacts, it kind of brings me to my next question with you, is that what do you believe can make a role challenging? If you're not writing a role for yourself, someone says, here's an audition, Rob, and you're reading that breakdown and you're reading that script, what is the most challenging part for you to be able to do that audition and be authentic and say, hey, that was my best foot forward?
That's a good question. I think there's always a balance of like what you think the writer or casting director or director wants, and what your vision for the character is. That can sometimes be challenging, because you'll read something and go, okay, I get it. He's the best friend. He's there for comedic support. Or, okay, he's the bad guy. He's this and he's this and he's this. But I just feel like this might be a little bit more interesting. Like, what if I sprinkled this in to it, and that, there's always a celebration of big swings and big choices, but sometimes it can just totally be different from what the creators have in their head. So that can be challenging.
Do you have any audition tips that you can suggest with us, saying, hey, when you get a breakdown, this is something you really need to be doing and not overthinking that? How do you prioritize that audition piece on what to focus on and what's just noise?
I mean, I think the first thing is, objectives and motivations. What does from what you can tell in a whatever 3-page audition, what do you think the character wants? What do they need? It's like a trope, but listening is crucial. I would say don't put as much stress on yourself about learning your lines. Having it on a computer behind the camera isn't the worst thing in the world, as long as you're present and you've gone over it a few times, obviously. But I guess those are my biggest things. Yeah.
Now, with all of the experience that you have in the career that you're in, is there a production that you've done so far that you're like, man, that was that was the best. That was the most fun I've had. That was like the role that was made for me. Something that you're just super proud to stand in front of.
There's definitely been some things that I've helped create that hold a special place in my heart, but the thing that really stands out to me is a show I was fortunate enough to be in called Blue Mountain State, which was just felt like a special little window of something amazing. We shot it in Montreal. We all lived like in the same hotel or within a block of each other for 3-4 months. And for those who don't know, Montreal in the summer is one of like the greatest places in the world. And we all just became really, really close friends. Like, man, Alan, the guy who played Thad in the show, was at my wedding. I lived with a couple of them for a brief period of time. There was just like we all just formed a really special bond. And I also just think that show was really, it's not a show that would get made today. And it certainly had its flaws, but I loved how it pushed some boundaries and was really unapologetic in some ways. So that was fun to be a part of.
I want to ask you about Blue Mountain State. You played Donnie, this lovable guy, and it was very relatable for me as someone who's done football and rugby as well. And it wasn't actually until the movie of Blue Mountain State that came out that they broadcasted that your character was actually gay. Was that the intent from the entire season, or was that just something they did for the movie?
That was just something they did for the movie. I loved that, specifically how they treated it. How it just like, yeah, it's not a big deal. So what? Just you didn't know because you never asked. And then in the movie, the Thad character is he's insanely supportive and he wants to broadcast it. So there's that interesting juxtaposition, but it's always positive. It's always just like such a positive thing. But
it was
yeah,
amazing to be honest with you. Just it was a surprise, but it was one of those. It was just there, and to your point, it was done incredibly well, very respectful and polite, and it was just really well. You never asked, and therefore you didn't know, and why would you ask, right?
Yeah, and it was right around the time too where I feel like I'm gonna mix up his name, but there was a football player. And he was one of like the first openly gay football players, and he was in the draft. I think his name was Michael Sam. Um, uh, so it was sort of culturally relevant in the moment too. Like, certainly not the first gay person to play in the NFL, but it was a big cultural moment that we sort of tapped into as well. And yeah, I was really proud of that plot line.
Now I want to ask this question because I've watched the television show and the movie, and it was at that time was very great for me. Of course, as you mentioned, there's a lot of boundaries that was pushed. It was very well written. Did you guys actually play any football?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, the all of the like extras you see in the football teams were real football players from, I think, Concordia University, and so there were certainly down times where we would mess around with them. A lot of the actual actors were really good football players as well. Alan, who plays Thad, probably unsurprisingly because he's like built like a Greek god, is just sort of crazy athletic and really good at anything. Romansky, the mascot, has a cannon. He could huck it. And yeah, I did play football for like 10-15 years before then. So there was a lot of times when I played the center. So there was a lot of times when we were like fake playing football that me and like a D tackle across from me would get a little chippy and get after it. And that was always fun, but certainly not real football, but there was a lot of fun had.
Good. Now, is there something that you're currently working on that you can share with us outside of pub crawl?
In development on 4 or 5 projects right now, trying to get a few things off the ground, from half-hour comedies to hour-long procedurals to another unscripted project. And yeah, nothing concrete yet, but I always just try to have a few irons in the pot. And then just auditioning, lots of auditioning.
Good. I'm glad that you're staying busy with it. And where can people learn more about Rob Ramsay?
Instagram, I guess, real Rob Ramsay. Yeah, that's about it.
Now, Rob, I want to ask you something a little closer to home for you. What is something that people tend to misunderstand about you the most?
Oof. I guess a lot of the roles I play are kind of like the brash or boisterous character. And I would say I'm a fairly quiet guy. Um, uh, love jazz music. I love just hanging out with a glass of wine or a bourbon. Not a big bar guy, contrary to
A pub
Donnie.
crawl?
Yeah. um, yeah, I guess that would be it.
And in your opinion, what's something that you believe we as a society need to start doing or stop doing as of tomorrow if you had a magic wand?
Oh, interesting. I would say the world could use more fart jokes. Don't you think that would make everything just a little bit more enjoyable? If we just like, I don't know, politicians always had whoopee cushions underneath their chairs, or I think the world could use a little bit more comedy, a little bit more fart jokes. Yeah.
I think people would tune into the House of Commons more often if they
Yeah.
knew that anytime a whoopee cushion's going to go off, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have time for one last question for you, Rob, and I really do appreciate your time. But what makes Rob Ramsay smile?
Mm, my son makes me smile. Um, Good music makes me smile. My friends make me smile. Um, Yard work makes me smile. And if I can combine all of those things, yard work with my son and my friends and good tunes on and maybe a drink in hand, that is just bliss.
Well, anytime you need an extra lawn to cut, you know where I am. Listen, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to Coffee with Chris. Our guest today is the amazing and very jovial Rob Ramsay. Make sure you check out Pub Crawl when you get an opportunity. Remember to smile to inspire and have a fantastic day, everybody. Thank you.
Bye all.